Hello and welcome to the Tarot for February 2024. I hope you're staying warm and keeping yourself calm and centered these days. It looks a little bit chaotic out there in the world. There were lots and lots of questions to ask this month, so I wrote them all down and then drew the cards. As I came to each card and considered what it represented, I was amazed once again at how the cards align themselves with the questions asked. Wow. The things on my mind this month had to do with concerns about our November election coming up. It's still months away, but it's still on my mind. And the food supply in the Western nations. And then I decided to ask about the new timeline that we crossed onto last November. So the actual questions, I had 10 originally, but I chose 3. The actual questions I settled on were 3 in number. Number 1, what can the cards tell us about the November presidential election in the U.S.? Number 2, what do we need to know about the food supply for Western nations in 2024? And number 3, what do the cards have to say about whether or not we crossed onto a new timeline last November 8th and what our prospects are for maintaining that timeline? And the cards drawn in answer to the first question, that was number 16, the Tower card. And in answer to the second question, we have the 2 of Swords. And in answer to the third question, which is really a 2-part question, I drew 2 cards. The first card was the Ace of Pentacles. Ooh. And the second one was the Strength card. So let's begin. So question number 1, what can the cards tell us about the November presidential election in the U.S.? Oh my. The Tower card is a pretty explicit card with many meanings, and they all point in the same direction. So here's a quote from the book Tarot Beyond the Basics. And it says that a 16th century name for this card was House of the Devil. A house that needs to be destroyed to liberate its inhabitants who are trapped by Satan's power. Wow. Oh. Isn't it a mind blower? Again, that descriptions from centuries ago, centuries past, can describe the present so accurately. The Tower card is a metaphor for human megalomania, the destruction of a civilization, and the scattering of its people. When you look at this card, you see a tall gray tower with 3 windows in it. The tower has been built on top of a mountain. The top and the insides of the tower are on fire. And it looks like it's been struck by a bolt of jagged lightning that is still visible in the sky. 2 figures, one in red and one in blue, appear to be falling from the top of the tower onto the rocks below. And a large crown that was sitting on the tower looks like it's been blown off in the lightning strike and is falling to the side. There are heavy clouds in the background, and the sky is a solid black. There are 22 tongues of fire seen in the sky, and there's no ground anywhere in the picture. The tall tower represents a power structure that's meant to be a protection, a watchtower keeping an eye out for enemies and warning the people in times of attack. The three windows at the top represent Christianity and its teachings about God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. So that implies that there's a religious failure coming along at the same time that there's a political failure or destruction. However, the gray color says that those in power and their institutions are cold, indifferent, and detached from reality. Since our question is about the presidential election, this indicates that those we have elected have been indifferent to our welfare and what we want. The fact that the tower has been built on a jagged mountain points to the possibility that the people in power have been inaccessible and hard to reach. The lightning strike symbolizes some kind of realization or finally seeing the light. But it comes too late to save the situation because things are on fire. And fire is the symbol of a rapid and complete change of state. Fire indicates an all-encompassing transformation, whether for good or for ill. Fire is fire. Fire also represents great passion, destruction, and untamed greed or aggression, pointing to the end of something. The question is about our elections. This card says that people had great passion for something in the past, but that passion has become antagonistic and now intends to change something. Since our question is about the presidential election, does this indicate a change in the elections or the state itself? The crown that has been blown off symbolizes a loss of control for those running things. It points to a loss of power as well as a loss of self-protection. And it also indicates having nowhere to hide. The two figures falling from the tower represent an abrupt and disastrous fall from power and the fall of ego as well. The falling figures symbolize delusions of grandeur that come crashing down whenever there is an absence of honor and steadfastness. The fall toward the rocks below says that their careers and perhaps their lives will crash on the rocks and be over. The red and blue clothing on the figures was not chosen to represent Democrats and Republicans because the tarot cards were developed in the 1600s, long before our political parties came along. But we can certainly apply that symbolism here because it fits perfectly. The two-party system might be coming to an end. Both parties are losers. In addition, the red represents passion, love, will, wrath, blood, and soil. The blue color represents cool-mindedness, lack of involvement, uncaring, calculating, and drunkenness, as in drunk with power. The clouds represent really cloudy thinking, and gray clouds point to a lack of clarity and the need to deal with what are called the shadows. So might this be the shadow state? The black sky says that the situation is in a state of complete confusion, with too many unknowns and deep mental and emotional darkness. Yet black is also the symbol of the womb of creative energy and something new coming out of this. Which brings us to the 22 tongues of fire and something almost magical. The number 22 is a master number in itself. It symbolizes a test of mastery having to do with the entire world. It's not just a local issue. The tongues of fire represent a destructive firestorm of communication and energies that come from the people who are now communicating heart to heart. Tongues of fire symbolize people who are no longer afraid to speak or act. People who are filled with a deep understanding of what has been going on. People who speak with a fire and passion that says they intend to set things right. Tongues of fire represent divine inspiration coming to the people who are communicating, working together, understanding what has happened and where things are going and where they want them to go. These tongues of fire indicate that people are not only speaking up, they are listening carefully. It means their actions are coming from the joining of mind and heart. They have been enlightened, filled with courage, and there's a new story coming to the people. The Tower card signifies the end of an ivory tower lifestyle for those in power. At the same time, it signifies healing, renovation, and restoration for the people. It says that there has been a massive awakening. People are talking, and there is a readiness to dismantle anything artificial, immoral, unjust, or that does not nurture life in all its forms. It indicates getting rid of anything that is no longer useful. It points to a time when people no longer tolerate what is not working. And this refers to ideas, people, buildings, organizations, environments, and nations. This is the card of the architect, the designer, and the builder. One of the references says it indicates being no longer willing to support the dichotomy of your life as externally full and internally empty, or the opposite, internally full and externally empty. The Tower indicates that the election in November may be the start of a year that is focused on bringing the internals and the externals into alignment. The Tower is known as the Lord of the Thunderbolt, and it means destruction, awakening, and understanding. Keywords for the Tower card are misery, distress, indigence, adversity, calamity, disgrace, deception, oppression, imprisonment, tyranny, ruin, and unforeseen catastrophe. Question number 2. What do we need to know about the food supply for the Western nations in 2024? And here the card drawn was the Two of Swords. A very interesting card with some surprising answers, a warning or two even, some demands, and a blunt declaration that the choice has already been made. Now, if the choice has already been made, that can mean several things. One, that we are not yet fully conscious of the choice that has been made. 2, the choice has been made for us. 3, that it's too late to make a decision that would fix a situation, and the choice has been by default. Or 4, that the choice has been made and things are in action, but it hasn't become obvious yet. The Two of Swords is the card of peace of mind that pervades all levels of consciousness: mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical. This card symbolizes a very subtle decision involving transformation to what is called a vivid peace. What is vivid peace? It is the peace that comes as a result of serious, resolute action. When you look at the card, you see a figure sitting on a bench at the edge of some very expansive waters. The figure is wearing a gray robe and is blindfolded. There's a white dot on the forehead representing the third eye, and you can see yellow shoes on the feet. The legs are slightly apart, indicating an openness to the flow of energy up through the body, but the arms are folded across the chest, indicating a blockage of energy from the heart upwards. There's a sword in each hand that extends off the edge of the picture while forming a large V. The water behind the figure is a very bright blue, and there are some big rocks sticking out of that water. In the distance, you can see the far shore across the water, and there's a sickle moon high in the sky. The sky is a slightly darker blue, and the ground in front of the figure is gray. The figure dressed in gray and blindfolded constitutes a severe warning against failing to grasp the issue one is confronted with. Swords represent the mind and thinking, and this card represents the need to use the mind to put together bits and pieces of information about reality in order to figure out what's going on. Since our question is about the food supply, which is critical to life, this may be pushing us to pay attention to what is happening with beef cows, with pigs, with chickens, with milk cows, with wheat, coffee, the weather, floods, freezes, bugs, and all of these, as well as how they all come together to disrupt the food supply. A failure in one of these areas makes it difficult for all the others, but failures in all of these areas would be catastrophic. The swords that form a V, whose ends cannot be seen because they are beyond the edges of the picture, represent a very broad mental horizon and a broad view needed regarding the food supply issue. The food supply was being set up to be a globalist operation. That's not happening. As the globalist operation comes apart, people are going to need to supply themselves locally. The V has two additional messages. One is that whatever the problem is, we have the capacity to overcome it, figure it out, and experience victory. The other is that although it is necessary to maintain a broad mental horizon, it is also necessary to take action for yourself. The message becomes, think globally, but act locally. Where have we heard that before? The yellow shoes back this up, as they represent the need to keep your feet on the ground wherever you are and keep your thinking practical in alignment with common sense. The water in the background extends off both sides of the card, and that symbolizes both surging feelings, because water is the universal symbol of emotions, and the hydrological cycle. Since all food needs water, this card asks us to be conscious of what is happening with water and the hydrological cycle? Is there a drought to contend with? Is there a flood to deal with? Is the water too salty, too polluted, too controlled, too expensive? There's a question about water here. Since people need food regardless of what's happening with water, this suggests that planting a garden with the intent to feed yourself could result in panic or big surges of fear if there's a flood, severe hail, or an unseasonable freeze that wipes out your food supply. Thus, the big rocks sticking out of the water call for careful planning and navigation to be able to harvest enough to feed yourself. They demand an ability to draw conclusions about things you cannot see, things that are hidden, things that you didn't notice or that no one ever taught you. There's an old saying in business that if you want to be successful, you have to keep your eye on what you cannot see. This brings us to the sickle moon and the darkish blue sky, both symbolizing and demanding the use of intuition, clarity, planning, and a conscious approach that takes yourself and your need for food seriously. If you are on the old timeline, it is likely that no one will be coming to save you. If you are on the new timeline, you will have to learn to be self-sufficient, at least temporarily. The far shore represents the concept of getting through a highly emotional period and reaching safety. It symbolizes feeling secure in yourself and your ability to feed yourself. The Two of Swords has another warning that comes with it. And that warning is reality doesn't just consist of one-way streets and guaranteed outcomes. Shall we say that again? Reality doesn't just consist of one-way streets and guaranteed outcomes. Given that our question is about the food supply, this warning says it's not a good idea to grow enough food only for yourself and think that's enough. Think about what you could share or trade. One of the messages of this card is one can only see clearly with the heart. Eyes are blindfolded, but the heart sees, the heart knows. See yourself feeding not only yourself, but one or two others. Since this is the card of peace of mind and a decision that has already been made, perhaps that decision is, in fact, that if you have a body, you're going to need food to maintain it. The number 2 is associated with this card, and 2s often indicate that relationships are involved or are critical in the situation. Do we need to set up our own food system and trade with one another? The warning, another warning with this card is that progress or a situation can come to a stalemate or even a deadlock in which nothing is resolved and people suffer. This then draws in the power of the sickle moon, which is sometimes seen as symbolizing, quote, helping the miserable and the weak against the powerful and the wicked. Certainly a consideration in the food situation. The Two of Swords is known as the Lord of Peace Restored, and keywords for this card are duality, crossroads, decision point, mental activity, impasse, dilemma, adaptable, instability, change, exuberance, and peace restored, but some tension still remaining. Okay, question number 3. What do the cards have to say about whether or not we crossed onto a new timeline last November 8th, and what our prospects are for maintaining that timeline? And this is a 2-part question. So the cards drawn were, first, the Ace of Pentacles, about crossing the timeline, and second, the Strength card, our prospects for maintaining that timeline. Very interesting. A pretty strong message about that timeline, especially from the Ace of Pentacles. It makes a pretty astounding and encouraging statement, and it couldn't be more appropriate as a response to our question. This card represents the borderline between two worlds. The borderline between two worlds. So it kind of hints that we're sort of on the border, maybe 1 foot in each world kind of thing. This card represents the borderline between two worlds, between one reality and another, or in our case, between one timeline and another. It represents the unwillingness to live in an external world that doesn't match the ideas, the visions, and the dreams of the internal world within each of us. This is very close to the same message contained in the Tower card above, in which there is a readiness to dismantle anything artificial, immoral, unjust, or that does not nurture life in all its forms. Similarities there. When you look at the Ace of Pentacles, you see a cupped hand coming from the clouds, holding a large yellow disc with a pentagram on it. Because the hand holding the pentacle is cupped, this brings in a bit of cup energy. Cups are all about flow and unity with others, whereas pentacles are all about the material, financial, and physical world. Material, financial, and physical world in which we enjoy nature and develop our various cultures. This is quite a powerful combination when considering the requirements of moving to and developing a new timeline of reality. However, the faint glow along the back of the hand indicates that the new timeline offers more light and thus will attract many people. The pentagram on the pentacle is the symbol of the human. And not just the human, but the human's magical, transformative energies that he has at his fingertips. If he should choose to develop them, of course. The bright yellow symbolizes consciousness itself, and this is a reminder that all things in the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual worlds are the result of consciousness. The disc has a double line around the edge of it, symbolizing that the situation brings a double-edged warning with it. Cutting oneself off too early from the supports of the old timeline could cause unnecessary suffering. Yet, failing to make the basic changes required to live differently could leave you stuck in that old world as it goes down. The reminder here is that timing needs to be practical and carefully handled. It may be necessary to use the tools, at least some tools, and some materials from the old world to set up the new one and get it to a point of stability before letting go of the old ways, the old thinking, and the old consciousness. Trying to use the new consciousness in the old world will only get you in trouble. Hanging on to the old consciousness will obstruct your move into the new world. timing. Toward the bottom of the card, you see a beautiful green landscape with lilies growing in the foreground and a rose-covered fence with an arched opening, forming a doorway or garden gateway that has no actual door to obstruct passage. The rose-covered fence symbolizes several things. First, while roses are beautiful, they are quite thorny. And this is a recognition that while we may see our world as having great beauty, comfort, and inspiration, there's no escape from the thorny issues that have taken over and enclosed us. The lilies represent new beginnings, a resurrection of sorts, and a life that is natural. They symbolize personal growth and the flowering of full human potential with less stress. Nice. Lilies also say there must be an alignment with beauty and all of nature. They tell of a need to honor nature and clean up the messes that have been made in the current world. Can we envision a world and find ways to live without waste, trash, and pollution? The green grass says that we do not have much experience with the kind of world or the kind of thinking that new world demands. And the yellow pathway to the garden gate encourages us to carefully consider what we are going to do about the problems we want to get away from. We don't want to bring them with us. And this brings to mind that old saying, quote, "You can't run away from your problems because you are the one who created them. And wherever you go, there you are." Mountains usually symbolize big problems and obstacles to surmount. And there will be some of that in the new world. But the blue mountains in this card have an additional meaning. Those peaks that you see through the garden gate indicate reaching a new peak for humanity and a reality that blends heaven and earth. The mountains also carry a message that says, make something out of your talents. Use what you got. It's bad English, but use what you got. The gray sky all around is associated with being unruffled, somewhat detached, and self-possessed. It calls for patience and letting go of fears and biases. It also warns of lack of awareness and indifference to the gift, the opportunity being offered. Go through that garden gate. If you haven't already, make that move onto that new timeline. This card is an ace, and aces represent new beginnings and pure potential. Since pentacles have to do with practical, grounded details and order in everyday life, the hand holding the pentacle symbolizes the chance to start over and build a new everything. Pentacles point to our heritage and our destiny. And the Ace of Pentacles carries this message, quote, "You have not yet completed the tasks you came here to do or grasp the fullness of the possibilities in front of you." End quote. Let me read that again. You have not completed the tasks you came here to do or grasp the fullness of the possibilities in front of you. This is a direct message regarding where we are at with the new timeline and the world waiting to be created. The Ace of Pentacles has long been known as the root of the powers of Earth, And keywords are initial spark, seed, new growth, steady effort, tangible reality, security, stability, self-determined, joining together, the perfect medicine, career change, new source of income, and documents related to business or practical matters. So this takes us to the second card that I pulled, which had to do with the second half of the question. What are our prospects for maintaining the new timeline and thus our new world? And the message of this card is pretty straightforward. It says, we will need strength. Since this message is so clear and obvious, I will only say a few things about it, but they are quite direct. The Strength card, number 8 in the Major Arcana, tells us that we will need to be strong to handle the changes brought about by a new timeline. Strength will be a major factor in what we are doing. This card is also the card of Beauty and the Beast. The beast is the old world, the old system, and the consciousness or unconsciousness that allowed that system to take shape. Beauty is the vision of a new world and its possibilities. When you look at this card, you see a woman dressed in white with one hand on the head of a red lion and the other hand under its jaws. There's an infinity symbol over her head, and she's wearing a wreath of flowers around her head and around her waist. The landscape is green and yellow, with blue mountains in the background, and the sky is bright yellow. This is the card of the archetypal struggle between the weak and the strong. And its base message is that the salvation of each of us is dependent on that of all others. In other words, it says we can only do this together. Its secondary message is that there is a need for the development of a personal culture within each of us. Personal culture, which we then bring to the effort and use to succeed. Wow. Each person needs to bring everything they are and everything they've got to the next level, the new timeline. That infinity symbol indicates both longevity and the ability to make things work and keep going. However, it also tells us that life is probably going to be a roller coaster, and we should prepare for that. It calls for realism. This card also calls for practicality. The wreath of flowers on the woman's head and around her waist symbolizes the flowering and beauty of every single one of us, including all creatures who share the world with us. Might this hint at a return to communication with all of Mother Nature? The red lion is an ancient symbol of power, courage, and will. And it often shows up when alchemy is needed or is taking place. The woman dressed in white represents the need for wisdom with a touch of wildness and the joy of life. The Strength card tells us to forget useless ideals and half-hearted activity and give the force a new chance. Literally, that's a quote. Forget that useless stuff. Just go with the force. The warning that comes with this card is the same one that applied to the Sorcerer's Apprentice. Think about what you're bringing about. Can you handle it? Can you turn it on? Can you turn it off? Can you modify as needed? That's the warning. The number 8 is the number of fate and starting over. And when we have a new timeline, we will be starting over. Keywords for this card are power, energy, nonconformity, dignity, generative, leadership, despotism, abuse of power, courage, complete success, discord, disgrace, and escape from a trap. So let's sum up what we've learned above. Question number 1, we ask, what can the cards tell us about the November presidential election in the U.S.? And the card drawn here was number 16, the Tower card. This is a major arcana card. Major issue. This is a card of the sudden and unexpected destruction of power and institutions. At the same time, there is an awakening in the population. Isn't that what we're seeing right out there in the world? The Tower used to be called the House of the Devil because it referred to corruption, dark shadows, and megalomania among kings, presidents, and prime ministers. It does warn of a world filled with confusion and chaos and the end of a lot of ivory tower lifestyles. It says that the structure of power has lost control, lost its crown, and that our election system is likely to fail in such a way that results in a complete loss of control by those currently in power. Wow. Question number 2, what do we need to know about the food supply for Western nations in 2024? And this brought up the Two of Swords. And its message is that something has already been decided and put in motion. This is the card of peace of mind, but it's a vivid peace, meaning that peace comes from resolute action and the possibility that we may have to take responsibility for feeding ourselves. The warning contained in the Two of Swords is that there may be a need to help the miserable and the weak against the powerful and wicked. There's also a heads up having to do with water and a call to become self-sufficient. Question number 3, what do the cards have to say about whether or not we crossed onto a new timeline last November and what our prospects are for maintaining that timeline? And there were 2 cards drawn, the Ace of Pentacles and number 8, the Strength card. The Ace of Pentacles says that we are on the border between one reality and another. So I think we're still in the act of crossing. And both cards indicate that we have an important opportunity in front of us that will require the use of the transformative energies at our fingertips. Yes, sir. The Strength card is the card of needing courage, as well as strength, and a willingness to deal with the beast. It reminds us that we have to make this journey together or we won't succeed. This new timeline will bring about alchemical changes in us and a resurrection of sorts. And we are advised to use wisdom with a touch of wildness. We are to let go and give the force a new chance. So that's it for this month. I hope you found some nuggets in there to add to your stores of golden wisdom, which I hope you're developing on a daily basis. Thank you so much for listening. And I'll see some of you in the Intuition 7 class coming up February 16th through 18th. So until we meet again, have a wonderful February. Thank you.